It is 7:01, so I figured we'll go ahead and get started and say hello. We're back to a little bit of a more normal setup where we've got this room where it wasn't available for election day last month and COVID for the last few years. We've got snacks, so please grab some snacks and we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So thank you guys for joining us for the December, I can't believe it's already December, 2023 Hawk meeting. You know, we're part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Habitat and Wildlife Keepers was the first chapter in North Carolina. We're getting close to 20 years, and since then we now have close to 25 chapters around the state, with new chapters opening up all the time. So it's exciting to hear. This is where we got started, and this is an old picture of Squirrel Lake Park, the pollinator garden that we had planted. So all these bushes are not just grown, but like way overgrown, and all sorts of weeds and everything else. So feel free to stop by Squirrel Lake Park and do any weeding that you feel is necessary. Or join us for an invasive plant cleanup at Squirrel Lake Park as well. A lot of wisteria, a lot of kudzu over there. You know, we're part of the National Wildlife Federation, and something that they've been doing for many, many years is encouraging people to go ahead and certify their yards. I think many of you already have your yards certified. Show of hands. Yep. It's actually quite simple. Food, water, shelter, place to raise young. And the fifth thing is being gentle with anything that ends with a side. Fungicides, herbicides, insecticides, all of those kind of things. Homicide, go easy on that too. So the idea behind this is any property, small balconies to huge pieces of property can get certified. And Matthews was certified a bunch of years ago as a community certified habitat, which takes a certain number of businesses, a certain number of homes, a certain number of places of worship to go ahead and certify. And then we continue to do that with education as well as more people certifying their yards. So feel free to go to National Wildlife Federation and look that up if you're interested. So, you know, we're a volunteer organization, and the big piece is putting on presentations. So if you know somebody who's a good presenter, like our presenter tonight, please bring it to our attention. If there's a topic that you're interested in hearing, let us know about it. Part of the leadership team is we go and help put together not only this, but also our Earth Day celebration, our Kids in Nature Day that we just did in October. And I mentioned that we've got snacks again, so feel free to say, hey, I'll bring snacks next time. We'd be glad to have a couple of cookies, maybe some homemade stuff. Someone made the best little bat-looking cookies for Halloween a few years back at this point, before COVID. But we could always use help, so little or as much, we'd love for you to volunteer with us. One of the things that we're going to be volunteering at is at our Earth Day celebration at Squirrel Lake Park, and that is set for the 13th, Saturday the 13th of April.
2024.
Ah, yes, thank you. I'll edit that. You can tell I recycle my slides as well as other things at home. So I need to change that to 2024. And so that is a lot of fun. We don't invite businesses for the most part, unless they're very oriented in environmental education. But what we do have are a lot of great groups like the Audubon folks, and of course their bird count seems to coincide with our Earth Day celebration. So hopefully this year it's a week sooner than their bird count. But lots of fun things, giveaways, tree saplings, and native plants, and a Native Plant Society will be there. A lot of great folks. Subaru's been our sponsor for pushing 10 years now. So we very much appreciate those guys. This time of year, I'm always talking to folks about leaving the leaves. All of your predators for next year's, your next year's predators are in the leaves. So particularly a whole load of ladybugs. So whenever I collect bags from my neighbors and all around town, I routinely see ladybug larvae on the paper bag. And so they're in there. They're trying to get out. They can't fly yet. They're the larva stage. And so not only that, but these kind of caterpillars that you get, this is a red-banded hair streak. These type of insects overwinter in the leaf layer. So leaving the leaves, you get some good stuff. Now, if you don't get rid of invasive plants, you get this guy. And Becky and I were talking about calorie pear earlier. And this is a project that I started a month ago for a week. And a month later, we just started on it again yesterday, Monday. This is the mutant Frankenstein offspring of Bradford pears. And so they're sterile, except they're not exactly sterile. They cross-pollinate with other pears, and then their offspring get these nasty thorns. So really nasty. So they're very, very stiff. They're very sharp, and they're all over the plant. So if you happen to walk around and you see a tree, and this time of year is kind of hard to ID with the leaves, and you see these thorns, that's the nasty one. That's what the thorny Bradford pear. So in the springtime, if you notice that the cherries have already bloomed, and they're all pretty in pinks and whites, and then the calorie pears, the Bradford pears, are going to bloom white. If you're driving around and you see them on the side of roads or on highways or in the forest, that's this guy. It also blooms white, just like the regular Bradford pear that you had bought or that the town had given us back in the 80s and 90s, that we didn't know any better. Now we know better, and there's a bounty both in North Carolina and South Carolina on these things. So if you cut one down, we happen to cut down about 400 of them. Real nasty. North Carolina Wildlife Federation, NC State, or the Forestry Service, and I can't remember the other organization that's doing this bounty in North Carolina. They'll give you a native tree, and not just some little tiny sapling, but like a 5 or 7 gallon pot with a good sized tree. Of course, it'll be a native tree: oaks, pawpaws, service berries, that kind of thing. So we just did one over in Sanford and in Wilmington. The one in Matthews was about a year ago. So this is our second year doing this Bradford pear bounty. So do look for it, and you'll see it in the North Carolina Wildlife Federation posts it. This is a Luna moth, another reason to leave your leaves. These guys go ahead and overwinter. I love this picture. I wish my hand was in it for scale because it's about the size of your palm. So if you don't know Luna moths, a lot of people aren't real big fans of sweet gums, but a sweet gum tree is a host plant for Luna moths, and these guys are just fabulous to have flying around. So even if you don't have a sweet gum, leave your leaves. Thanks to our sponsors, Williams Subaru, as well as Birdhouse on the Greenway. Again, longtime sponsors. Williams Subaru has been part of us for a long time, and they continue to sponsor us, so we're very glad for that. Tonight, we're in for a treat. I don't know if many folks know about Loons. I'm looking forward to learning a whole lot more. So I look forward to, if you would come on up, we're going to go ahead and switch our computers.
No previews, guys.
So you guys thought you were here to talk about Loons, didn't you? So anyway, my name is Brooks Wade. My wife Kay is with me tonight, and she and I own and operate Jocassee Lake Tours, which is a naturalist-led guide service to Lake Jocassee and the surrounding Jocassee gorges. We're finishing our 13th year as a naturalist-led service. We started a nonprofit 5 years ago, I think. And under the umbrella of the nonprofit, we do work with grade school kids a lot now, especially since post-COVID, the schools have been allowing field trips again. And work with, at college level work with senior citizens and lifelong learning programs. We sponsor a Jocassee Naturalist Certification Program as well, and Loon research. The common loon, this will be our 8th season of behavioral studies of the common loon on Lake Jocassee. And we have an interesting history on how all that got started, which I'll kind of go through it while we talk about loons. Has anybody been to Lake Jocassee before we go any further? You have? And Carol has been on the boat with us. Anybody else? Have you really? Wonderful. You look familiar.
2017, bro.
You look familiar to me. I mean, seriously. Who is this guy?
we were on a Rhodes Scholar
Rhodes Scholars, yes. Again, another loss to COVID right there.
Yeah.
That connection we had with Rhodes Scholars. We have been rebuilding so much since then of the acquaintances and organizations that were so important to us in the pre-COVID years. So good to see you. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir, absolutely.
Thank you for being
If
here.
I may interject, if anybody has a chance to go, go. There's some things down there you will see that you won't see up here. And Brooks does a good job driving the boat.
That would be including Loons on Lake Jocassee,
Yes.
which is an interesting bit of life history that we'll talk about this evening.
Could you say again the name of your group?
Jocassee Lake Tours is the company. The nonprofit is Jocassee Wild Outdoor Education, and there'll be much I'll tell you about that through the evening, and you can resource that on jocasseewild.org, a different place to you'll see what we're doing in that area. You know this bird here, the frigate bird. You guys know that bird? I saw something in an eBird announcement about a sighting of a migratory frigate bird in North Carolina somewhere. Did anybody see that? And I went to the literature and I said, they're a tropical bird and they don't, what are they doing up here? But it was sighted twice. I don't know if that's storm related or what would bring a frigate bird up here. But it's a tropical bird. I was raised in Central Florida and would see them some on the coast, one here, one there over the summer months. And I was raised knowing that it was called a man of war, a man-o'-war. And they are called that because they will attack another bird in flight, get them to release the food that they have, regurgitate it back out, and then catch it in flight and take it and eat it from another bird. They are a fairly ferocious bird. And a couple of things are interesting about them to me. One is some ornithologists are poets, and they know how to name a bird exactly. And a magnificent frigate bird is a good name for this bird, which is just extraordinary. But it has one of the lightest wing loads of any bird on Earth. The wing load is the ratio of the weight of the bird to the wing surface of the bird. So this guy weighs nothing in relationship to the surface of its wings. He can fly. There's a population in Africa that can stay afloat for weeks at a time. In the Galapagos, a couple of weeks at a time. And they barely beat their wings. They fly on thermals, and they can do this because of the ratio of the wingspan to the weight of the bird. So, if you would. And then this guy, look at that elegant bird there. That is the common loon in winter plumage. Most people recognize them with all those spectacular bars and stripes they have in summer, but they're not as appreciated in their winter look, but it's demure, but remarkably beautiful to me. And this is what Europeans called the common loon, the great northern diver. Another poet infiltrated ornithological societies and named it a good name. The Gavia family only has loons within it in the entire family of birds, and there are 5 species of loons. The loons that we work with and see most often are the common loon. So, if you'll go to another slide, Kate. And this is what they're called in North America. So sadly, that ornithologist didn't have a drop of poetry in his genetic structure because there's literally nothing common about this bird. It's really quite an extraordinary bird in all ways. But that's what it's called in North America, the common loon. So why is it called common? I'm going to give an educated guess here. We work with ornithologists and loon experts, and there is not a solid answer from where the word common came from, but they nest commonly, as you can see from the graph, from Alaska all the way across the top of the world to Greenland, Iceland, and even to some of the islands off of the British Isles. The darker parts of the map are their nesting, or their winter range. But they're the only loon of the 5 loons that are in North America that will nest in the lower 48. And you will see the line in the upper Midwest that drops down into the middle of the Midwest. That is see if I can make this work. I do right there. That guy represents loons that would nest that far down in the United States 50 or 60 years ago. the development of lakes has caused loons to move up and out when they can. They have an ability to get used to being with people, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for them. But mostly they want privacy and they like wild places. So they go farther up in the New England areas, up into the Canadian provinces as well. The United States only houses about 7% of the common loons. The rest of them are Canadian. You can see the little, not quite yet. So you can see the little diamond in the southeast. So loons nest in the Pacific, in the upper Midwest and New England, Canadian reaches. They winter, as you can see, in the South Atlantic, southern Gulf of Mexico, and to a small degree in the reservoirs of the southeast, like Lake Jocassee. The percentage of them on the lakes, nobody knows. The only focus on the reservoir lakes in the south is going on with us and the scientists that we are working with at Lake Jocassee. But it is understood, thanks to eBird, that there are a scattering of loons throughout all of the significant reservoirs in the southeast. But no numbers, no community studying them, no research except at Lake Jocassee. So if you would look. So the questions, why are we here to talk about loons instead of some other bird, any other bird? And I think that loons are considered probably the other iconic bird of the United States, along with bald eagles, and they have an interesting relationship to discuss. But back in indigenous cultures, the history of that, for literally thousands of years, loons have been a part of that. They are written into New England studies, and written into the history of the settlers in the entire upper eastern United States. And they are a sentinel species. I know you guys know what that means, but it means that they are at the top of their food chain. So if they have something wrong with them, it's indicative of the health of the environment in which they live. So it is a sentinel species, a bioindicator. They have studies about mercury, all the way to the United Nations studies about mercury that are influencing world decisions that have come from the study of loons suffering from mercury poisoning and lead poisoning as well. So, and then it's loons. They are big birds. They are spectacularly beautiful birds, and they will let you into their lives. If you respect their space that they require as a nesting bird, then they will share your lives with you. And it makes them loved. In the southeast, when we have gated communities, we have all these wonderful southeastern lakes, and every one of them that has any significant number of people on them has a homeowners association. Well, take that into the breeding lakes of the upper part of the United States, and every lake has a loon association on it, protecting the 2 nesting pairs or the 5 nesting pairs that are there. There's an organization there that cares about them. They do something to the heartstrings of human beings that I'm not sure any other bird does. Interest in another bird, absolutely. Love of another bird, I don't know if it's as matched in other birds. I just don't know that. And I'm a person who loves every bird and has 3 or 4 for which I live and travel for. So, to indicate and back that idea up, look at that. Look at the different places that put them on the covers of their magazines, on their license plates, on their coins, on their stamps. And this just goes on and on, all the way across the breeding lakes of the upper Midwest and New England. A deeply loved bird. So the work at Lake Jocassee, the history of it is pretty interesting. We'll be in the 8th year this year of studying loons in the winter. So the history natural history of the common loon in the East is, and this is for thousands of years, they're one of the oldest birds in the historic record. They're similar birds from 50 million years forward. Loons, as we see them now, anatomically, were around 2.5, 3 million years ago. Just a bit smaller, and that's it. So what they do is they breed in the north and they winter in the south in saltwater environments for millions of years. So they have a particular gland, a desalinating gland, so they can do that. So the birds of the flyway of Lake Jocassee are upper Midwestern birds. That's known from banding studies. It's an established fact from 2017, 2018 in a USGS study of upper Midwest loons. So they go to the Gulf of Mexico to a smaller degree in the Atlantic off the coast of Florida, but significantly in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And that is, when I was 30 years old, that's when I fell in love with loons there in the winter as I was working in the northern Gulf of Mexico. So in the 1930s, we started building reservoirs all over the United States. I think it started with the TVA reservoirs. So at some point in the life history of loons, they started using reservoirs. Nobody knows when. There's not an ounce of literature about it prior to this century. When we first started living on Lake Jocassee and discovered loons there in winter, I immediately went to the literature. There's nothing in it about loons that are on lakes in the southeast until this year, and primarily since they have begun to be studied in Lake Jocassee. So they start getting into the scientific literature, and the world starts realizing that something else is going on in their life history beyond the stopover lakes, which was I think understood that they would stop there and stop in major rivers like the Mississippi on their way to the Gulf of Mexico in winter. So we have a resident population every winter. And so the ongoing study, 8th year now, in the behavior of loons in winter on freshwater has never been studied before because it just wasn't even known that this even existed. So we have this population of somewhere between 125 and 150 loons every winter. And we've been banding them since 2016 with great difficulty, I might add. The lake is 400 feet deep, and it's a challenge to band loons in winter because of that. They're either in the ocean, go try to catch one there, or in a nice contained lake where you have a shot at it, but it's hit or miss and really a struggle. In breeding lakes, where they're mostly banded in the summers, loons protect their chicks, and it's in shallower waters, and they don't run from you. They will defend the nest and makes them catchable, which is a much different circumstance. With great frustration and a lot of cold nights, we have caught a handful of birds starting in February of 2016, the first bird that we caught. So it is considered the most studied bird in North America. And that is because, to me, I think it is said that it is because they're so available to you in the summer months. They don't go anywhere. They defend their nest. They're right there. So you can study them. And if you give them the distance that they ask of you so that you do not disturb their behavior, then they'll let you hang out with them, study them, watch the chicks, watch everything that they do. They're combative in summer. They're nourishing in summer. They are the remarkable parents as birds, just remarkable parents to watch. And they will allow you to do that. So they have been studied and studied and studied, and every summer the volumes of work that go into loons just expands, and it goes on. But what is going on in Jocassee is new, and it's drawing a great deal of scientific interest simply because of that. So why Lake Jocassee? Probably there's loons all over all the big reservoirs in the southeast, probably. And eBird suggests that is the case. So what is it about Jocassee? It is a very clear lake, and they are site feeders. They're site migrators, they're site flyers, site feeders. It's a good food supply. The lake is stocked with brown and rainbow trout and smallmouth bass every year. 30,000 trout every year. And I would assure you that the fishermen catch about 300 of that 30,000 every year. It's hard to catch them, but they sure put them right back in there. And it's a remote lake with not a lot of human beings. And of course, in the winter, there's not a lot of human beings on any of the lakes. Most people go home and watch football all winter. So that's an issue that may benefit them. I've actually had a biologist tell me that they think it's because the lake looks like an Adirondack lake. And I think that's a stretch. But maybe so to a loon. But the best part about it, and this is for the purpose of scientific inquiry, is the configuration of Lake Jocassee. And I'm going to show you map of it now. But for one thing, it's a small reservoir relative to the big reservoirs that we're all used to throughout the Southeast and North Carolina and South Carolina. It's small. The green area on the lake is Devil's Fork State Park at the very bottom of the lake. If you go all the way to the top of the lake, at the top of Toxaway River, there's 9 miles. And there are, as an aside, there are only 3 boat ramps in Devil's Fork State Park, and that's the only access to the entire lake by boat. You simply can't get there. It is surrounded by publicly held lands mostly, and mostly protected lands. It has 37 houses. Kay and I, when we moved there 14 years ago, there was 1 house under construction. It's finally finished, and there's another one under construction now, 1 in 14 years. There's just a little bit of a postage stamp of privately held in holdings on the lake, and other than that, it's a protected wilderness lake. And it feels like it. When you get out in the lake and away from the dock and the crowds that will accumulate around any dock in the summer, it's just as wild a place as you want to find in the Southeast. But the lake is 9 miles, 3 or 4 miles across at the bottom where it's at its widest. And that makes it a small lake. And we know where the loons are on the lake. There's some interesting subpopulations that we know the numbers on. We count them every year. And when you have a group of volunteers and scientists that come for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, then there's hardly a day that the weather keeps us from going. I mean, there's places we can't go, but the places we can because of the configuration of Lake Jocassee. We can find an arm of the lake where you can get out of the wind and you can't get out of the cold, but you can get out of the wind. And we can still work and study and learn from it. So it turned out to be a good lab. And I think that's the best reason for this ongoing research at Jocassee is it simply works as a place, a field of study, I think would be a good way to say. So if you would, Kay.
Working on it.
So early in the day, Kay and I lived at Jocassee for 2 or 3 years. We were the park host in the campground for the first 2 years. And I had been a lover of loons for, at that point, 30 years of my life. 25 years of my life. But it was in a marine environment. I lived on an island in the northern Gulf of Mexico for over 20 years and worked on the Gulf of Mexico. And heard loons there, fell in love with loons in winter. I still have never been to a breeding lake in summer and seen loons where everybody else sees them. I see them in winter, which hardly anybody has seen them. But so we're living there, and I go down to the water one of the early days of living there and heard a loon on the water. And I said, what does this mean? We had no idea. So I'm letting this sink in over a couple of years, and we started our enterprise of Jocassee Lake Tours together. And in the 3rd year of that, I said, well, the rest of the world needs to see what's going on here. So I sent an email with some attached photographs to Erica Lemoyne, who still conducts, is the program coordinator for Loon Watches, which is the oldest loon conservation organization in the breeding lakes of the upper Midwest. And she forwarded that email, responded to it to me, and then forwarded the email to Dr. Jim Peruke, who we've been working with now for 9 years, who was the lead loon biologist at the Biodiversity Research Institute in Maine. And they are the institution that has studied loons historically. From the beginning, from the first bird band, and there are now thousands of them. They started this whole thing, and Dr. Peruke was a part of that. So Kay remembers this day well. I'm driving home down the mountains on Highway 11, and I get this phone call about 10 miles from home, and I pulled off to the side of the road to answer it because I just don't talk on the cell and drive at the same time. And it was Dr. Peruke on the phone. And he was, an hour later, half an hour later, I don't know how long we talked. The next thing I know, he's flying a research associate of his, a student who was studying sea ducks off the coast of South Carolina, had him drive over to Lake Jocassee in February. And I showed him the lake, and I think 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, here's Dr. Peruke, and we're banding birds out in the middle in February. It was as cold as it could be. And we banded a bird that night, and the rest is history. He started this whole thing for the first 3 years, and we're doing our 8th year of study this year. The first 3 years were sponsored by Earthwatch. Is anybody familiar with Earthwatch? Mm-hmm. They're an international citizen science organization, and they recruit people who want to work as volunteer, as citizen scientists with ongoing research projects from Mongolia to Lake Jocassee. In the years that they were sponsoring what we did, we had people from Belgium, all across Europe, California, all over the place, because their outreach is international. So that's the world in which Dr. Peru came and how we got started in this at day one, basically. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the uniqueness of loons. They are, as we've discussed, they're ancient birds in the fossil record. 2.5 million years ago, pretty much what they look like now, just a bit smaller. And that is a dated figure. Over 40 years old is where we know so far how long loons live. That is known because there is a pair of loons that have been banded and studied for 35 years now. And their chicks have been banded. And a loon generally will not be a successful breeder until they're at least 5 years old, 5 or 6, sometimes as old as 10 years old before they ever successfully breed. So if you give this bird 5 years, that is pretty definitely at least 5 years old, and they've been studying this bird for 35 years, that makes this couple over 40 years old. So nobody knows how long these things live, but at least 40 years. Mortality is significant in the first year. But if they make it out of the first 3 years, then their mortality is very low, and they're long-lived birds with a small reproductive rate, but they live a long time. So if they're allowed to do that, then they're productive reproducers. So 3 years to get breeding plumage. The gray that you see, these winter looks, that's their year-round look until their 3rd year. And then they get the spectacular bars and stripes and the black and white bird that most people are familiar with in that 3rd year. It doesn't mean they go charging up to their natal lakes and try to command a new boyfriend or girlfriend. They don't do that. They stay on the Atlantic side, mostly from the Carolinas north all the way up to Newfoundland for the first 3 years of their lives. Probably getting up the guts to go home, because I'm telling you, it's tough territory when they go to their natal lakes. They have to dislodge an existing male or battle it out. Females to females battle it out, and males to males battle it out, and it is a ferocious thing to watch. They will kill each other. And so the average life span of a couple is 5 or 6 years, and one will die from old age or die from battle or get unseated from its coupling by a younger, stronger bird. So 5 years-ish is kind of the average that couples stay together. So we will get to the point where one of the slides say one of the misconceptions about loons, and one of them is that they are monogamous their lives. They're monogamous for a season. If the one doesn't get killed, they are, and it's ferocious. They are ferocious animals in the inbreeding months. They are gentle animals for the most part otherwise.
Good.
Yeah. So their bones are solid. It's a diving bird, one of nature's most successful diving birds. They can dive to 250 feet at this point, is as far as we know they can dive. Penguins can go to 600 feet, so they don't win. They can't dive the divers, but they are remarkably successful divers. Very skilled at what they do. 5 minutes, we have clocked them at nearly 5 minutes on Jocassee. Staying down there. Mostly they're feeding in shallower water, and they stay down 30 seconds or a minute or 15 seconds or however long it takes to get up under some bait fish and catch one. But we watch them on the lake. They go into the deeper waters, and they'll come up with a catfish 4 minutes later, 5 minutes later. So they can stay down. It kind of seems like about as long as they want to. They have the capacity. They have air. Many birds have this. They have air sacs at the tip of their feathers, and they can compress that and exhale in the process and just dive and do so. I'm going to show you a video in a minute. They do so effortlessly, totally effortlessly. But they fly. We talked about the ratio of the wing surface to the weight of the bird. They weigh 10 pounds, 8 to 10 pounds, Midwestern birds. New England birds can weigh up to 12. And they can't glide and don't glide because they don't have the wing surface to carry the weight. So the only time you see one glide is when they're coming down to land. And it's a lovely thing to watch, but that's the only time they can glide. So their wing beats is 250 times a minute. Because if it was 240, they'd fall out of the sky. They have to beat that fast to keep going. And they will migrate at 75 miles an hour with no wind assistance, maybe 90 miles an hour. If they have a following wind all day long, they can migrate for hundreds of miles in a day. And this is a bird that doesn't stop. It's like a 10-pound hummingbird. They just simply don't stop all day long.
All right, let's see if we can do this.
So put your feet up. I got a couple of minutes video. We just discovered this video a few weeks ago. I don't know how long it's been around, but it hasn't been, I don't know a soul that's seen it yet, including the biologists that I shared it with. But I'm going to show you just what kind of divers and feeders they are underwater.
We hope. Don't build it up too much.
All right, it's too late now.
There we go. Great.
You got sound?
Sure.
As you watch this, remember you're looking at a bird. A bird, huh? As you saw, the legs are well back on the body. That is designed for that kind of mobility and maneuverability. Solid bones allows them to dive. They can turn the femur at 280 degrees,
Oops.
so they can just flip around. They can chase and catch fish in the water, including a trout, fast, big fish, and can outrun them and catch them. Can we not do it twice?
Well, I don't know.
Can we move forward?
I could sit here all night.
Me too.
Okay.
So
here we go.
they're called loons, and it derives from the Scandinavian for awkward, because they cannot walk on land. If you know the good southern word scooch, they scooch along the ground to get in and out of their nest. They can't walk. If they're beached, it's because something has gone wrong. They can't do it on their own. But they're made to do what you just saw do. Flying is a secondary consideration. They are swimming birds. Just totally remarkable skills. They arrive. We start seeing them when the colors are. We start having boats full of people who come to see fall color in the end of October, early November. That's when we first see our loons too. The fall migration is a very relaxed process. They will start leaving their natal lakes in September, but they'll spend a month on the Great Lakes. They'll spend half of it in the upper lake and they'll go half of it in the southern lake and then kind of work their way down. They won't necessarily fly all day. If they see a reservoir they like, they stop. They'll stay 2 or 3 days and take a month or longer to get to where they're going to spend the winter. Spring migration is another matter. There's a great deal more urgency involved in it. So loons molt twice a year, but they molt their flight feathers once a year, all of them, and once in January and February on Jocassee. And so there's a good month to 6 weeks that they can't fly at all. With that in mind, the only time we ever see them flying is when they arrive and when they leave. They do not fly once they're there for the winter. That's done. They don't fly anymore. They don't fly from the upper lake to the lower lake. They don't do that. They're there. They're water birds. And they don't want to fly. They have no reason to fly. They swim just fine. And they can't fly. About mid-January, they've lost the ability to fly until early March, when they've regrown their flight feathers and begin the process of leaving. And it's a dynamic month in March when all that starts. Behaviors change. Testosterone starts going up in the birds, and it's a different phenomenon. The winter behavior that we've been studying for 8 years changes into pre-spring behaviors in March.
Ready?
We had talked about the lake is a stopover. It's not just that they winter in Jocassee, it's also a stopover lake, both ways. Going to the Gulf of Mexico and coming back. It's such a big, nice lake for that, and we studied it on both ends. Yes, ma'am, please. So what we do as grunt laborers are the volunteers in any scientific enterprise are the grunt laborers of the trade. We do the data collection. We watch everything birds do all day long and record it. It's called, in biological studies, it's called a TAB, time activity budgets, and we take a bird, we pick out a bird, and for an hour, we'll write down what he does every 2 minutes. And you do that for 7 or 8 years, and you start getting a quantitative understanding of what that bird does all day long. As we added it on, we studied one bird for 6 hours in a day. Mostly it's an hour and 2 hour incremental, and the data is collected, and the scientists take it home, and some poor grad student has it dumped on his computer to do all winter long in school, and then they come back in a few years and start looking at the quantitative analysis of what has been learned on Jocassee, and you start learning about what their behaviors really are. I will say this as a grunt volunteer, which is my job. I lead the volunteers and function as the guide in the business. I've learned how to learn about animals, how biologists learn about animals, and it's this profoundly patient watching of an animal minute to minute to minute in its life. You just can't grasp what the nature of the animal without that kind of prolonged observation. And that's not something I understood. I didn't know enough about science to know that that's how you know what you know about a given animal. And I came out of this process just basically in awe of how science does what it does. How when we read about an animal, where does this knowledge come from? What it takes to come up with an understanding of any given animal is phenomenal. And it requires tremendous dedication and love of the critter you're studying, or you wouldn't put up with him for the duration that people do. So we gather literature for baseline data is what we do for years and years and years. And why does it matter? Conservation. It not just matters because it matters to understand an animal, because they're so fascinating, they're so incredibly interesting to understand, but the conservation of an animal, the more you understand about, the better we have as stewards to take care of this given animal. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge that's been happening over the last 20 years, even more precisely in the last 10 years, with regard to migratory patterns of birds. And it comes to do with modern technology, the way that radio transmitters and things that are going on that can be attached to birds now, and you can understand what birds do if they leave Alaska and they go to South America. 50 years ago or 40 years ago or 30 years ago, they understood they lived in Alaska, and they understood they ended up in Argentina, but they knew nothing about the in-between. Now, that knowledge is being built up where they know exactly where they stop in the Bahamas and exactly where they stop in northern part of South America. And not just that they stop in Bolivia, but they stop in this garden patch in the jungle in this given country. And it's getting that specific, and that allows conservationists to protect the places that these birds live. So the understanding of that animal leads to the protection of that animal. And it's significantly important, especially with going on in the decline of songbirds and birds in general all over North America. I will interject one interesting thing about that. As you all know, bird populations are going down in North America significantly. Not every species, but a lot of them. We're losing millions, if not billions, of birds. The loon population, the common loon population, is somewhere between steady and increasing. So the question is why? Why is this happening? Because human beings are invading their breeding lakes. And the conservation organizations are building platforms and creating new nesting things and doing everything to counteract human destruction of habitat and more human exposure on lake shores. But a new ingredient that I think over the next few years is going to lead to some significant study is all these birds that are landing all over the inland bodies of water in the southeast. There's almost no mortality in these circumstances. We have seen 2 dead birds in 8 years. 2. And on the marine environment, all winter long birds are dying, being caught, putting into rehab centers. I mean, on the entire Carolinas coast, all the way down the coast of Florida. Mortality is high in the winter. It's challenging in the winter for new birds, for young birds. For the first 2 or 3 years, a lot of them die on the coast. Emaciation, storms, sharks, all these things. And sharks are a predator to loons in winter. But all these things that occur that do not occur in freshwater reservoirs. So maybe it's a stabilizing factor. If loons make it to 5 years, they could be making it for 30 years of breeding success. So if they can make it through that first 3 to 5 years. So it's a good chance that that's the variable that is not particularly understood now, but is being looked at as the stabilizing factor in the loon population in the east, at least in the eastern United States. So many questions. See the nice flock of birds there? That's spring. See the green trees? That is during migration period. We get huge, huge numbers of loons at times. I'll tell you a bit more about that as we go. I ramble. We're talking about loons. I can't not ramble. But if you have questions, I know generally we save them to the end. But if you want to ask questions, please do. And I'm in love with loons for 40 years, but I'm far from knowing the answer to every question you might have. But please feel free to do so. So they are site loyal. Now, really, one of the most interesting facts about loons is they are site loyal, meaning that they will return. Once they're capable of going back to their natal lakes, that's where they go. They go back home to breed and to fight for a new territory, but they go back to their natal lakes. That is being site loyal. What was not known at the beginning of the study of Lake Jocassee, so are they winter site loyal? Do they go to the same places in winter, year in and year out? Well, there was one study in Southern California that said yes, they do, and that was a marine environment study, but in a contained bay. So it's probably the only good marine study that's ever been, because it's hard to study a bird in the ocean, but this was a bay, and so they had a chance to do what we do. So we abandoned birds, and these birds keep coming back. So the fact of site loyalty in winter has been established on Lake Jocassee. The first bird that we banded, I mentioned that, in 2016, has a name. His name is Bob, and he has an orange and a yellow band on his leg, and we have seen that bird every single year since. So the Jocassee is 9 miles to the bottom to the top, right? 3 or 4 miles wide. He lands in the same part of the lake every winter, every single winter, because they don't just go to Lake Jocassee, they go to specific parts of the lake. We have 3 subpopulations of loons on the lake. There's no reason to believe they don't know each other at this point, but because they don't mix. All the banded birds, when we receive them more or less where they were banded, the same part of the lake. They don't migrate up and down the lake. They stay in one given area, and there's 3 areas of the lake in which they do. A large part of the upper lake has the biggest numbers. There's a central part that has the big basin you may remember from the diagram, and then there's one interesting arm of the lake at the close to Devil's Fork State Park that has 8 birds every year. Not 7, not 4, 8. We call them the Howard Creek 8. It's the gang of 8. But every year, same numbers every year. Are these birds getting older? Why don't new birds come in? You know, every understanding leads to more questions than answers, doesn't it? But the first question is almost impossible. It is so hard to tell a young bird. You have to be a really good observer, and the weather conditions have to be perfect, and the light has to be perfect, and then you can distinguish a first or second year bird from a little bit older bird. It's tough in winter, though, because they all have the same gray appearance all winter long, all of them, without exception. So they have 2 methods of feeding that is intensely studied on Jocassee. One, they dispersely feed. Some of the birds never congregate, never feed together. They basically live in the deeper parts of the lake and dive to 300 and 400 feet, I guess. I mean, at least 250 that we know of. In the other parts of the lake where there are more loons, they fish in concert with one another, much like dolphins do. They will herd fish and then jump in and bust them in the middle, and you'll see these showers of bait fish above the loons. So two feeding strategies, and why is that? What are the dynamics of that? It's one of the things that the biologists have found most interesting to study at Jocassee. So what do we know about it? Something I could have told them when the birds got there is life's easy on Lake Jocassee. But a low winter mortality, good weight, no emaciation we can understand 2 birds that we've seen dead. I think most of them, or both of them, were likely from shots of lead that kill birds within weeks. One shot, one little tiny piece will kill a loon, also kill an eagle and any other bird predating on a decomposing bird or fish on the side of the road or anything like that. Lead kills animals, and it kills a loon rapidly. They socialize more than they do in a marine environment or in their summer environment. They socialize a lot. They hang out in big numbers. And when they do find balls of bait, like you were watching that one bird do, then the feeding can be explosive. It's great entertainment to watch loons. That is when they're really approachable, because when they're feeding, they don't really care if you darn near can bump into them in a boat. They will swim under the boat. If they're in the business of catching fish, they'll swim under the boat right beside you. They're fearless. They don't really care. Because we're not bothering them, and so they go do what they do. So what we see in winter is the molt, which is an extraordinary thing to be able to watch in the spring of the year as they molt. They start in January, February, in this slow process of changing into their breeding plumage. And it's a process, and it's a fascinating thing to watch, especially in the laboratory of Jocassee, where it's so calm and we get so close to them and just kind of intimately watch this process on a day-to-day basis. And they preen, they bathe. It's a fun animal to watch. And as you can see, these are all shot fishing, diving, preening. Also, there's a technical word for that called loafing. But that's a fun thing to watch. Look at the size of that foot. And I don't know if that's a counterbalance, but they're preening their chest feathers. But they're constantly preening. Their feathers have to be in good working order to be the diving bird that they are. And they have an oil gland on the back of their tail feathers like many water birds do. And they'll use their bill and they'll work it into the oil gland, and then they'll spread that from their head all the way over their body for the oil. And it's not water. Historically, it was believed, up until the last few years, it was believed that oil was waterproofing the feathers. But in fact, it's not. They're very stiff feathers, and the seam between one feather and the next is microscopically, it looks like a Velcro, and the oil is being used to seal that seam, so that it keeps the entire bird waterproof as it dives. And interesting, you watch these birds, and you get in March, mid-March, and they're time for them to be leaving. They're working on leaving. You start seeing pairs around the lake. Do they migrate as pairs? Do they pre-gather? It's not believed that they do, because males and females, the banded ones that have been studied, and this has been duplicated a lot, don't go to the same place. One goes to the South Atlantic, the other one ends up in Jocassee or the Gulf of Mexico. So what does this pairing mean? But it's obvious that they're pairing, but does it mean anything? And do they leave like that, or are they just hanging out just at the end of their days at Jocassee? It's a big question that would require a lot more success at banding birds and catching them on both ends to have an answer to.
Is there a way to identify between the male and female markings on the head or
None,
anything?
nothing. You'd have to watch them making the egg to know. Otherwise, the male bird is about 25% bigger. So if you saw two of them swimming, you might notice one bird's a little bit bigger. Other than that, you got to see nesting behavior to see. So the parents leave first on the natal lakes, weeks in advance of when the young birds, the juvenile birds, will leave. Sometimes juvenile birds get iced in because they wait too long, and the weather catches them and they're stuck. And guess who waits for that? You know what the primary predator of loons is? Any of you? Bald eagles. Bald eagles. And they sit in the trees. And and guess what's groceries? Is when a loon like that gets trapped in ice, and it's a brutal thing to watch. I've watched films of it. But the conservation organizations are all on it. Every homeowners association knows the 911 number to call to save the loons that are stuck in the ice. And they teams that get out there and they rescue every bird they can and literally move them over to the Atlantic or someplace where they can proceed with their migration. Do
The
they?
eagles catch, is it just the juveniles or is it the adults as well?
Rarely an adult. Adult's a big, formidable bird, but the chicks are easy pickings. I'll tell you an interesting story about that. Am I talking too long? I don't even know what time it is. No.
Yeah.
How am I doing?
You're getting there. 7 o'clock.
So you want a great eagle story? Am I okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Tell me to go away if you need to. But you love a few. So I'm going to tell you an eagle story that happened last year. But the population of upper Midwest eagles is exploding. The end of DDT and all of that, their populations are increasing. Conservation efforts are significant in that part of the world. So they're getting to be a lot more eagles than there are loons. And the loons don't reproduce that rapidly, but eagles do. So all of a sudden we're getting an imbalance in that part of the world. So eagles have learned to hunt loons cooperatively, meaning this, they will fly like this over a lake. And the lead bird will get the attention of the parent bird, who starts to protect their chick. They're watching the eagle. They go like that. The second eagle comes in and gets the chick. Wow. That's new to eagle behavior entirely. It's been observed over the last 2 years. And in the big splash 2 years ago, I think it is now, is a dead chick was found on the surface of a lake, and a dead eagle was found on the surface of the lake, belly down. So they necropsied both birds. The eagle had a giant hole in its sternum where a loon had come up, apparently, and had come up, and when that eagle got right there, the loon killed the eagle. Now, loons are big, smart, dangerous birds. And the beak is the weapon. It is a weapon. One of the two biologists that we work with had a hole poked in his canoe because he got a fiberglass canoe because he got too close to the nest. Next thing he knows, he's got a leak in his boat. And when we ban them, the first thing you do is cover the head. So you got to get a handle. You got to get a handle on the bill, or you will get a hole in your hand. So interesting birds, and when the relationship between eagles and loons on Jocassee is fun to watch because eagles will fly by and there is a distinct sound that loons make in response to the presence of an eagle, and you'll start hearing that. It's an abbreviated wail, but it's unique to the presence of an eagle. So we'll be watching birds, and then they'll change their tone. You go look at there's the eagle. It's that predictable. So yes, sir.
So on the lake in winter, so the loons come in, do they stay in the water the whole time? Or
Yes,
do
sir.
they ever get out of the water?
No, they
don't
can't,
get out
can't
of
and
the water?
don't. Both answers.
Okay.
I mean, they can't walk on land.
Right.
And they don't want to anyway. They're too good at being a water bird. Yes, ma'am.
With the loon diving and opening his mouth, is there something that shuts down? Have they discovered what that is that allows them to grab the thing and still not drown?
That's a physiological question I can't answer. I'm sure it's understood, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's in Jim's book, but.
I don't know
couldn't-
how they seal
I
that
couldn't
off.
tell you the process.
But if you notice in that film, it just looks effortless, doesn't it? I mean, they just glide. It looks like, yeah, this is what I do. Watch me. It's just totally effortless. And I don't know how they do that. I know they desalinate. They can totally desalinate and live in salt water all winter long. But it's more taxing on them, but they can do it.
Because I was going to ask you earlier how you ID the tags, because you said Bob has got those two,
But the color combinations are unique.
but they're always in the water, so they're not flying around, so you don't see the tag. But then you showed a picture of them preening, almost like
Otter.
yeah, like an otter. That's exactly what I was thinking too.
They will. One thing that one of the behaviors they do is it's called a waggle, and they will stick one leg out and do like this. And the reasons they do that are we'll fill a book on everybody guessing why they do it.
Exactly.
But Bob waves at us every year. He waves. I see the tags. I say, hey, Bob. Hey, bro. You back?
You said I was going to ask you, how is it that you're seeing it? But then his legs were sticking out.
Two things. One is they show it to you.
Yeah.
And the second thing is Lake Jocassee has 25 or 30 feet of visibility. It's crystal clear at the surface. You can literally, on a calm day, especially with binoculars, you can see the bands on the lake, on the legs.
In
Oh,
water.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's some good drinking water.
it's good drinking water. I wouldn't hesitate.
Would you talk a little bit about the bottom thing? Loons eat their way.
Yeah, we bring this up because fishermen think that loons will clean out. Maybe if a pond is small, yeah, but in general, 30,000 fish are put in Lake Jocassee, and we have 125 loons. And they're there for 3 or 4 months of the winter. So they don't decimate any large body of water with significant fish populations. But sports fishermen think they do. Some do. So we have to defend the loon in that process because it's just simply not the fact. They are ferocious eaters, and it takes a pretty good sized lake to support a pair in summer when they're feeding 2 chicks. They will go hunting every day hard, but still they will not eat their weight in
What's their
fish
average?
every day.
What's the
Half a
average
pound,
pounds?
half a pound.
Half a pound a day
Yeah,
of fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not much.
yeah.
And then in the summer, is that when it's more like 2 pounds?
That goes up
3 pounds?
in breeding
In
time.
summer.
Yeah, in summer. So they don't mate for life. We discussed that. Even in the literature now, the current write-ups on loons, they talk about they migrate to the southern coast of off the coast of Florida and the Atlantic or in the Gulf of Mexico. Totally ignore this entire population of loons that are all over the southeast, and probably every lake of 1,000 acres or more, I'll bet there's a loon or 2 in it. So that they don't. The people would say their eyes turn brown. They don't. They do get dull red. They are strikingly red in the summer months, and they get dull red when we see them. And we will watch them as they molt into their summer plumage, that the eyes will get really, really red. And some of that is an observational phenomenon. I mean, it just looks redder because they've got a black body as background, but the eyes actually get redder as the summer produces. They don't use their wings to swim underwater. Penguins do, and to which that's their closest relative is the penguin. Let's see what's up. So the life of the lake Jocassee in winter is the birds that live there, and the other birds that migrate in, the water birds of Jocassee, this guy, Ring-billed gulls. I know you're familiar with them if you have a landfill. But I have talked to the birds at Jocassee, and they told me they don't go there. They are wild birds, and I'll tell you what, if you want to see a beautiful bird in flight, you need to see a ringbill. At the ocean, across lakes, just don't look at them in a landfill, and you'll have a better feeling for them. But spectacular birds. We get them by the hundreds. It's the most common of all inland gulls in the eastern United States. To me, the prettiest of all gulls that we see in North America is Bonaparte's gull. They are there now in numbers on Jocassee in December. They're not there in the dead of winter. They migrate farther south, and you know when the spring migration is on for loons because Bonapartes migrate with them, or so it appears. When the loons start showing up from other locations, so do the Bonapartes. But they don't end up in the same place. They don't nest in the same areas, but they sure seem to travel in the same areas. And it's the smallest gull that you see in this part of the world. There's one smaller, the little gull, that's its name, and it's Eurasian, and occasionally are seen in the eastern United States. I don't think I've ever seen one. Maybe, but I don't think so. But Bonapartes are little guys, and they fly with the agility of a tern. And I've watched them be above a group of loons feeding, and the loons are pushing the bait up, and the bait will start showering the herring or the shad that will get up in the air to escaping the loons, and Bonapartes will come down and pick the bird out of the air and go back in line, and just come back and do that until the loons quit knocking them up above the surface, and that is a dramatically cool thing to watch. Horned grebes, we get twice as many horned grebes every winter as we get loons. And they are, to me, they're like loon wannabes. They do everything loons do, but smaller, shallower, smaller fish, insects, interesting birds, really beautiful birds. And at the very end of their time with us, at the last part of spring migration, some of them will molt into their breeding plumage, and then it becomes the most beautiful small bird you've ever seen in your life. And there'll be one here, one there that we catch that it's finished its molt before they leave. They're really quite spectacular. I want to tell you one thing interesting about a Bonaparte's gull before we move on. They're the only gull that nests in trees. Like the rest of the bird world, they nest in trees, not on the shore like every other gull on Earth. They nest in trees. And they nest in this part of the far north and in the northern parts of Alaska, on the ecoregion, and I don't recall the name of it, but there's an ecoregion that is where the boreal forest moves
Tundra?
into the tundra. But there's a small ecoregion in there, and that break between the tundra and the boreal forest that has ponds and more scattered trees. And that's the habitat that they nest in. And they feed on insects in flight all breeding season. They don't catch fish anymore. They don't act like a gull. And then they turn back into gulls when they come. It's transformative in the fall of the year. I have seen them catch a huge moth in flight. The first time I saw that, I saw this bird flying like a tern, just like zipping through the almost bat-like in its capacity, and caught this mammoth moth in flight, and I had no idea what I'd just seen, but it took me a while to figure out what I'd seen. But that's what they did. And when they get to us, they can still do both. But generally, they're feeding on fish at that point. Now, most interesting animal, though. And of course, those guys. Jocassee gets migratory eagles in winter, so we probably have 4 resident birds in the summertime. Last winter, in January, we counted 16. And we do an eagle count. We help with the annual eagle count that is gone across the nation every year in January, and Jocassee has its own count, and we participate in that. And so they're with us all winter, and we have one active nest that we know about, that we can see from the lake. So I'll tell you a bit about spring migration. But the 2 things we study are winter behavior and spring spring migration. This will be our 8th year of studying winter behaviors and our 3rd year of studying spring migration. Spring migration itself, I think, is the great unknown phenomenon of the Southeast in the natural world. It is explosive. It is the most powerful thing I've ever experienced in nature. You'd be out in the morning at 6 o'clock in the last week of March, well before first light on a dead calm, not a sound morning, and you have hundreds of loons on the face of the lake right in front of you. You don't know it because you can't see anything yet. And as the light comes onto the lake, the loons start to wake up, and they make wing movements and sounds, hoots and sounds that they make as the energy of migration starts to generate in these birds, and it's palatable. And it's called, German scientists call it Zugaru. It is the energy of migration that migratory animals, birds, elk, birds and animals that migrate. It's the energy of migration. And some mornings it is fascinating. Some mornings it's explosive. If you're there on one of those mornings where we have had hundreds of loons land, and they all leave, and one bird starts it all. And as far as the basin, you look at all the way across, you finally get some light, and you can see it, and one bird starts. And loons have to run a long way, as long as a football field, depending if there's any wind to help them, to get aloft, because they're so big. So they have to run to get started, and they have these great big feet. So guess what you're hearing? Helicopters, pow, 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 running across the lake. And it's socially motivated. So another bird hears that. Now you got 2 birds going pow, 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 and they're running across the lake. And then it's 5, and then it's 10. And birds you can start hearing the wing movements of the birds as they expand. And then they're in small groups around the lake, 10 or 15 here, 10 or 15 there. 3 birds leave out of the 15, then 5, then the whole group is gone. And they're flying low, and they fly over the next group. Well, they're going, and that group goes. And they're flying around the lake, and it stimulates the entire lake, and then hold your hat. It's just explosive. And you have birds flying that high, almost where you can touch them over your boat, just flooded with these magnificent birds that are that big, flying over your head by the hundreds. And it is an experience like I have never been able to have of any other thing that strong in my love of nature in my entire life. I've had biologists from Clemson be out with me and say, this is an undiscovered phenomenon of South Carolina. It's an undiscovered phenomenon of the Southeast that this goes on. And surely it doesn't only go on in Jocassee, but this is where it's being looked at. So we have, and that's why this new program, this will be our 3rd year of studying just that. So it's getting some attention now. With regard to participation in this, we have volunteers that staff both weeks. It is volunteer staffed and volunteer funded. So you can come stay with us for a week. And if you choose to do that, I want to tell you that it is an immersive experience. You live and breathe loons. If you don't like them when you get there, you're going to hate them or love them by the time you leave. Because you get out of bed, you're talking loons and watching loons, so you go to bed at night. Talks at night, on the water all day long. Everything is catered. You don't have any time to do anything but pay attention to loons. We have Zooms at night from the significant loon biologists around the country. And the biologists that are with us give talks, informal talks every evening. So it's Loon City there. It's wonderful. And then as well, we do our own tours available to clubs and groups all throughout that. We do it year round. That's what we do for a living, but we also do that all through loon season and have a lot of bird-specific outings that groups ask us to do with them. We've done it with the Sierra Club out of Charlotte pre-COVID, several trips actually. So the ways to come see what I'm talking about, a lot of ways to do it, from commitment to a week to come spend a day with us. And you can be able to experience what we live for all winter.
What are the dates of your upcoming one?
We take most of January off, then it's full board from there on. The
So
Loon
people
research.
have a week in January.
Yeah, so no, in the research is the 2nd week of March is behavioral studies, and the 4th week in March is the migration studies. And we are our calendar is determined by the academic availability of the biologists that we work with. And plus, it has to be the right time for the loons. for them to be there. But we work with university level groups that want to come see this all winter, except for the brief period of time we take off in January as a company. Everybody gets to go to the Four Winds for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we settle back in and do that all winter, every week. So you can come pretty much anytime. If you want to learn
Every
it,
tour is a loon tour in the winter.
every tour is a
Get
loon
that
tour in the
out
winter.
there.
That's a fact.
Yeah, we do waterfalls too, but, people do come to see those, but it ends up being, we see loons, we stop, we talk about loons.
Yep, I saw them, it was end of March, April.
Yeah.
When I was there.
Yeah.
But I also saw them in Alaska when I lived there, so.
Well, you got to see breeding, lots of breeding inventory there. Yeah. But anyway, I'd love to have you join us. So we're going to talk a little bit about the sounds. They make all these wonderful, distinct sounds. Start with the hoot, which is a one-syllable sound that they make when they're cooperatively feeding, when they're chit-chatting between mates, when they're with their siblings on ponds. It's a quiet sound. We hear this all winter. One syllable, sweet, conversational, chit-chat. When they're feeding, oh my goodness, they'll be chatting back and forth. Over here, Great. The tremolo is the sound they make when they're excited, when they're agitated, and when they're flying. So during the spring migration, one of these explosive mornings, you're hearing 150 birds, 200 birds doing this one sound that you're going to hear here, flying right over your boat. It's wild. It's a wild sound. The yodel is a sound that only males make, and they only do it during breeding season. It's the bad boy sound. If you hear that, pay attention. And we hear it every now and then in the spring of the year as the testosterone begins to flow again. They'll get cranky, and you'll know it if it's a male, because it's a sound unto itself.
Back off, because I'm coming for your canoe.
I'm a bad boy. You better move on. And I've watched them get combative on the lake, never where it's actual physical contact, but close. They're starting to feel their oats, and they're preparing themselves for breeding season. Well, I'm going to save the last note to tell you a thing or two about opinions on why people have a particular affection for loons. And some of it, I think, is their parental care, and they let you watch them raise their chicks. And as human beings, it's compelling. They do an incredibly good job of parenting their birds. And then they are spectacularly beautiful. And they're not little. They're just this great big bird with awesome appearance and sharing their lives with you. It just pulls on you. It pulls on you. But here's what they're most famous for. It is all the way back in indigenous literature is descriptions of this. They're the whale call, W-A-I-L.
First one, right?
Yes. Listen to the third call. That's the one that gets me. I think that where loons reach people is there. And it is the sound they use. It's called the where are you sound. You hear it at night. On Jocassee, I hear it in the mornings. If I'm at the edge of the lake 30 minutes before sunrise, that's when you hear it. Now, who are they looking for in the winter? Maybe their soulmate that has flown from some other region that they spend the winter with. But it's the sound they make when they're looking for their mate, when they're looking for their offspring. And it's a lonely sound or an alone sound. I think it reaches humans at that place, that existential place of aloneness. Not loneliness, but this individuality. That they are unique and I'm here and I'm alone and where are you? And it pulls here. It pulls here on me. And it just reaches human beings like no other a bird reaches them at an emotional level, it seems to me. When I learned about loons, I never saw a loon. I worked in the Gulf of Mexico in the middle of winter. It'd be fogged over, and I was a commercial crabber catching stone crabs. Crab is commercially caught off the coast of South Carolina, off the coast of Florida. And whenever we had that, we just stopped the boat. Nobody could work. And you had this sound, sounds travel in a fog, and it gets low, and it travels a long way across the water. It's just totally mesmerizing. So a couple of books to suggest to you. If you'd like to continue your thinking about this, Loon Lessons, written by Dr. Jim Peruk, is one of the two scientists that we work with, and it is the definitive book on totally up-to-date science on common loons. It's encyclopedic, and it's a dense read. You better like loons, but it's well written, but it's detailed, and you'll learn a lot about loons in all their various behaviors, right up to the current science of the day. And this book just came out, a couple of years ago. Right?
It came out about a year ago.
And A World on the Wing, I don't know if anybody read that book in here. To me, it is the most interesting book on natural history I've ever read about anything. It is the current information on bird migration worldwide, and your jaw will drop on what is understood about birds and how they migrate. It is a phenomenon beyond your imagination. When I was reading that thing, I'd wake up Kay in the middle of the night. Wait, you won't believe this! I mean, I couldn't even describe how phenomenal bird migration is. It's been all been learned by this incredibly micro technology that is attached to birds now. But if you want a book you can't put down about the natural world, that's the book. And lastly, before we go to that, the thing I have learned most and appreciate most about the 8 years that I've been studying loons and working with loon scientists is an appreciation for other animal intelligence other than us. And you watch an animal long enough, you start realizing just how differently intelligent they are. Their intelligence is not necessarily human intelligence, but it's so intelligent. Decision-making, choices, behaviors change according to circumstances that is extraordinary. So Henry Beston was a remarkable naturalist, wrote The Outermost House about not Chesapeake Bay, but New England. Anyway, famous book, I think in the 70s. But his quote about animal behavior I just committed that to memory, is so right. They are not brethren, they are not other, they are not underlings, they are just differently smart. And it's to be, I think animal intelligence is something that is becoming more studied and more understood and more appreciated as time goes by now, currently. So thanks, guys. There's nothing I like doing more than talking about loons. I appreciate you. Thank you.